Hello and welcome to this, the second stage of the quarterfinals here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by R&D member Ian Duke, and we're going to get a chance to see how the players that made it out of stage one fare now that they have more vehicular opponents. It's all vehicles decks, all Mardu in our feature match area, and we get a chance to see whether or not experience, the 11 Pro Tour top 8s of Palo Vitor Damo de Rosa, is enough to overcome being on the draw as the lower seed. Let's head down to our feature match area to check out our second set of stage 2 of the quarterfinals. Hello and welcome to this, the second stage of the quarterfinals here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt. I'm Tim Willoughby, joined by R&D member Ian Duke, and there we can see the man with the second most Pro Tour top 8s of all time, 11 Pro Tour top 8s, showing no signs of stopping. Palo Vitor Damo de Rosa of Team Channel Fireball Ice. His opponent, who finished higher in the Swiss, that is Donald Smith from Team Lingering Souls. Both of these players on Mardu Vehicles, similar lists, but I have heard that on the play, Donald Smith is down to 6 cards.
Yeah, we already have a couple things to say about sort of the character of this matchup here. As the first thing you pointed out, Tim, is that Donald is on the play. Definitely an advantage for him. However, mulliganing to 6 hurts, especially so when you're on the play, just losing that card quantity. As far as the deck lists matchup, they're of course very similar, but as we talked about earlier, I think Donald Smith has a very slight edge in his deck list with a couple extra copies of Fatal Push in the main deck.
But already we see the difference between having a turn 1 play and not. Toolcraft Exemplar able to crew that Heart of Kiran, so Palo Vitor Damo de Rosa getting the first hits in. Meanwhile, Donald Smith having to content himself with his first actual creature to do any crewing, being on turn 3 with that Thalia Heretic Cathar. Now, of course, 3-power first strike guaranteed all the time important, and there are a lot of non-basic lands in Palo Vitor Damo de Rosa's deck, so the ability of Thalia could be pretty important here.
Yeah, it also potentially just slows the offense a lot by causing creatures to enter the battlefield tapped, and then they can't be used to crew vehicles. Unfortunately for Donald Smith, Palo Vitor has the shock there to take out Thalia at a nice mana advantage.
Depala, Pilot Exemplar coming down, and that crewing up Heart of Kiran, allowing an attack for 5 in the air from Donald Smith. Get used to these life totals falling fast. This is kind of the character of these vehicles matchups. Both players able to get creatures on the board and a Heart of Kiran to crew.
And we can see something already that's going to be a huge characteristic of the rest of our matchups for today, being Mardu Vehicles mirrors, is that Heart of Kiran very much is the crux of the matchup. And either being able to answer your opponent's Heart of Kiran or making yours larger through use of Depala or a Veteran Motorist, those are going to be the defining elements of how these matchups play out, as well as who can curve out the best. As Luis said at the desk earlier, you're really looking for that 1 into 2 into 1+2 draw.
And anytime you see any kind of legendary permanent that people are happy to play a full 4 of, you know that you're onto a real powerhouse. Looking at Palo Vitor Damo de Rosa's hand, he has quite a lot going on here. Concealed Courtyard, his land, the one land he has in hand, but then a good amount of removal or indeed a Depala of his own here.
Yeah, so Palo did miss his land drop last turn, I believe. Did pick up a Concealed Courtyard here. Has the option to, for example, main phase Unlicensed Disintegration to Pala and just hope to fade a creature on Donald Smith's next turn. Instead opts to advance his own board with a Depala of his own. And
given that Depala pumps both the other permanents on the battlefield that Palo Vitor Damo de Rosa has, that a pretty nice hit there, pumping both dwarves and vehicles. Toolcraft Exemplar is a dwarf, so that one coming in for 4 points of damage, the Heart of Kiran coming in for 5. Donald Smith down to just 4 life here, and he's kind of in check. He knows that next turn Palo Vitor Damo de Rosa is representing lethal, and we've already seen in Palo's hand he does have removal.
Yeah, not only does he have that unlicensed disintegration we talked about before, he also has a copy of Shock. So unless Donald Smith can win the game before Palo has an opportunity to cast those 2 spells, Palo essentially has him dead with the tools that he already has in hand.
There is an unlicensed disintegration in hand for Donald Smith here, but that will mean using the 1 energy he has on his Aether Hub, worth it in this instance, but even dealing with one of the creatures on the battlefield for Paulo, there's a lot of different angles of attack at this point for the Brazilian Hall of Famer.
So it looks like Donald passes the turn back, leaving up Unlicensed Disintegration, ostensibly for that Heart of Kirin there. Unfortunately for him, you know, if that's all that he has, he's still dead on board, and as we know, even deader with respect to what Paulo has in hand. So I think we're going to see this game wrapping up fairly shortly in favor of Paulo. It's just a matter of how he chooses to navigate these final turns. And
this a big win for Paulo if he can get this first game, because this is him kind of breaking serve. By finishing higher in the Swiss, Donald Smith did have the play, and typically in aggro matchups, that's where you want to be. The mulligan really hurting him there, though. Almost every card in PV's hand live goes with a Scrap Heap Scrounger, choosing to spread his board out and have an extra creature to crew. So this is 3 attackers, and with a shock in hand, he knows that he's got lethal a lot of different ways.
Yeah, the best Donald can do is, for example, Unlicensed Disintegration, the Heart of Kirin, and then crew his own Heart of Kirin and maybe block the Dapala. He'd still die to the Toolcraft Exemplar in that case. I suppose he can block the Toolcraft Exemplar and take 3 from the Dapala, but then we know Paulo has shock in hand as well. So I think, almost regardless of what Donald can come up with here this turn, I think this is going to lead to a lethal combination in favor of Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa.
This is, of course, a best of 5, so we're going to have plenty more magic from this one, even after this game completes. And the first 2 games getting played before there's any sideboarding going on, there will be adjustments being made to each of these decks after those first 2 games, though. So this big attack really giving Donald Smith pause. I think that he knows that he's up against it, just trying to figure out if there's a way of scrambling around what's going on. Just the 1 instant in hand, so crews the Heart of Kirin, knows that there shouldn't be too much that can deal with it for 1 mana here. However, he's facing 2 lethal attackers plus Dapala.
And energy.
Has to kill off something. Kills off Dapala such that he would shrink the Toolcraft Exemplar, but the shock in hand, enough to pick up the first game for Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa. Congratulations to the Brazilian Hall of Famer. He picks up his first game there. That's the first step on the way to get it through to the semi-finals. We will be jumping across to our other match on the back table, that one between Eduardo Sajgalik and Liu Yuchen. But first, these messages.
Put what you've learned from watching the Pro Tour into action and compete to become the champion of your favorite game store. Test your skills and your new standard deck at Game Day. Top finishers are awarded special Game Day prizes, including Full Art Premium promo cards and a champion playmat for the winner.
Check out Aether Revolt Booster Draft Leagues on Magic Online. Build a deck at your own pace and play at your convenience. Draft anytime, play anytime. For more information, visit mtgo.com.
It's time to take back the power.
Hello and welcome back to this, the second set of quarterfinal stages here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt. We've already seen our first game, but we're going to get a chance to jump across and see this man, Liu Yuchen. He was our last undefeated player here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt, advancing to nearly 10-0, I think, before he picked up his first loss, up against Eduardo Sajgalik. Sajgalik, of course, we saw in the first stage of quarterfinals defeating Martin User, and we've heard already that in this Mardu Vehicles matchup, we're going to be seeing players starting with a few less cards. Liu on 6 cards and Sajgalik started on just a 5-card hand. But there is the turn 1 Toolcraft exemplar for Liu Yuchen, and that is the ideal start. Let's see what he can follow it up with. An artifact would be perfect here. Thraben Inspector allows that. Gets a hit in for 3 here thanks to that clue, and there's a follow-up. Spire of Industry is able to tap for colored mana because of that clue, casting another Toolcraft exemplar. If you had to pick a starting hand of 6, this has to be one of the best ones.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic start for Liu Yuchen there. And I have to point out something pretty unfortunate for Eduardo Sajgalik. He actually had sort of a great answer to this opener in his hand in the form of Fatal Push, but his mana is just fairly awkward here. He could have played the Aether Hub and maybe spent an energy there, but given what he had in his opening hand, that would have left him really, really vulnerable to getting color screwed after that. So he opted not to do that and is falling behind on board as a result. Adds the Veteran Motorist, but not really in a great shape, staring down 3 creatures from Liu Yuchen, who is on the play this game.
Yeah, this kind of the classic white weenie start that we've seen since the dawn of Magic. 1-drop on turn 1, 2 1-drops on turn 2, attack, 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 and let's see what the follow-up is here. That is Aethersphere Harvester. This is one of the cards that's unusual to Liu Yuchen's list, and if we're talking about racing, this is a potent threat. It's a 3/5 vehicle, it flies, it costs just the 1 to crew, so even Thraben Inspect can handle that, and with 2 energy he can give it lifelink on 2 separate occasions, and lifelink is just huge in a race.
Yeah, this is one of the cards that I've termed a mirror breaker for this matchup here throughout the weekend here. Not every list is playing Aethersphere Harvester, but it just the combination of stats, having that 5th toughness allows it to block Heart of Kiran, the ability to get lifelink, can swing races. It's just a really flexible and powerful card and really, really shines in these aggressive mirror matches.
Cultivator's Caravan allowing a Fatal Push there to deal with the second Toolcraft exemplar. So 2 exemplars down, but it seems like Liu Yuchen still very much rocking and rolling with his draw. Casts a Veteran Motorist. That allows him both to scry and gives him pretty much the perfect creature with which to crew that big vehicle. Coming in, it's got +1/+1 thanks to the crewing from Veteran Motorist, and that means if he chooses to spend energy, and it looks like that is Yuchen's intent, he's able to gain 4 points of life on that attack.
Yeah, things looking pretty grim for Eduardo here in this situation. Not only is there a huge life total gap, but Liu Yuchen is also up on board presence, up on total cards that he's seen this game as a result of the mulligans, and Eduardo really going to need to claw his way out of this.
Yeah, I mean, an unlicensed Disintegration right now might be able to get him in there. He does have the Cultivator's Caravan along with Aether Hub to get the black mana. As things stand, though, he's going to have to go with something a little bit more straightforward. Taps 5 mana, casts all of the remaining cards in his hand. Dapala Pilot Exemplar, Heart of Kiran. These are powerful cards, but when you're on 8 and your opponent's on 23, they may just not be powerful enough.
Yeah, this is it's a good start to getting back in the game for Eduardo. He has Dapala as well as the Heart of Kiran, so he can make his Heart a 5/5. That can sort of challenge that Aethersphere Harvester a little bit on the other side of the table, at least challenge it from getting in for damage. But as we saw, Liu Yuchen played Veteran Motorist in the following turn. He was able to set up his draws a little bit with his Scry, so it's unlikely that Liu has nothing here to play at all. We'll see, though. Here comes the attack.
Now, he knows that Dapala can make that Heart of Kiran into a 5/5 blocker, so let's see what's going on here, because he did crew the Harvester with his 1-drop, and unlicensed Disintegration enough for a very quick scooping up of the cards there for Eduardo Sajgalik. Just the perfect draw for Liu Yuchen in that state. Able to deal with the 1 blocker that Eduardo was able to present, and little smile there and sigh of relief from Liu Yuchen. No one likes to mulligan to 6, but mulliganing to 5 even harder. Tough one there for Eduardo Sajgalik, but I guess he has to hope, you know what, at least Liu Yuchen has used up his really, really good draw when I had a bad set of mulligans.
Couple of quick games so far here, Tim. Seems like things are definitely coming down to the opening hands and those early turn starts, as well as who's on the play versus who's on the draw. And I think that's going to be something that we're going to continue to see here, at least until we hit the sideboard matches, where decks are then potentially going to bring in a little bit of extra interaction, a little bit of extra removal.
Well, Donald Smith kicking things off with Toolcraft Exemplar, and it looks like exactly the same thing from Paolo Vitor, Damo de Rosa. No one able to get the early jump on 1-drops this game. Both of them are going to be looking for an artifact in order to turn on the abilities of the Dwarf, though, and no play on turn 2 from Donald Smith. He's showing weakness. Will Paolo Vitor, Damo de Rosa be able to capitalize? He does have a Hearts of Kiran, so he gets to attack for 3 here. Toolcraft Exemplar, not so good on the blocks, but fantastic when being aggressive. Hearts of Kiran after Toolcraft Exemplar, that the draw that you want. Let's see what Donald Smith has to do in reply. Well, there's 3/3 drops in hand, kicking things off with Talia here. Just an attack for 1 with the Toolcraft Exemplar, that the cost of not playing an artifact. But a 3/2 first striker at least ought to hold back the Exemplar on the ground. It's instead potentially going to jump into an airship. Plenty of lands here for Paolo Vitor, Damo de Rosa, but non-basics are going to come into play tapped, so he has a slightly more complicated set of decisions as to how to sequence his lands if that Thalia is going to stay in play.
Yeah, in theory that would be true, but it actually looks like Paulo's mana situation lines up fairly well against the Thalia here. He does have a basic mountain he can play as his 3rd land drop, which will allow him to play both Thraben Inspector and Veteran Motorist, and then unfortunately those will come into play tapped, but he can still use his Toolcraft Exemplar to crew up Heart of Kiran and get in for 4 points of damage.
Yeah, no removal in hand for Paolo Vitor, Damo de Rosa, so at least for now, Thalia ruling the roost. Veteran Motorist comes down. 2 cards going to the bottom here for Paolo. Does not want another land, not too interested in a Scrap Heap Scrounger. Crews up, swings in. Donald Smith takes another hit. And he's going to be looking, it looks like he's drawn a Bomat Courier there, right on time, the 1-drop. It does have haste, though. It's a nice way of at least messing with combat math. It's a little bit harder to just sort of immediately prepare for. And if he runs out of cards, a great way of refilling.
So an interesting note on Paulo's turn, he could have played his basic mountain that turn and also played Thraben Inspector, instead decided to play the Concealed Courtyard tapped, and that could mean that he's setting himself up for a top deck Gideon. He did a little bit of digging there with scrying, and just wants to be prepared. Doesn't value the Thraben Inspector that highly on the board, and just wants to make sure that he can play something super powerful next turn.
Bomat Courier, the Letter Bug, picks up its first card from the top of Donald Smith's deck as it attacks. Paolo Vitor dropping to 11 on those swings. Potential 4 mana to spend here. Let's see what he's got with it. He's got another copy of Heart of Kiran. This kind of the dark side of having legends in your deck. Sometimes you just can't do too much with the second one, but when Heart of Kiran's as powerful it is, I'm sure that Paolo doesn't mind too terribly much. Thraben Inspector coming down. It'll bring with it a clue. And it looks like that clue just immediately getting cracked there by Paolo, who sees yet another land. The first few lands very, very important, but for these aggro decks, they're designed to be able to operate on about 3 lands for the majority of their deck.
So Paulo doing some combat math here. Things get pretty tricky, especially when you consider that, from Paulo's point of view, Donald Smith may have a removal spell. We do know Donald has a couple copies of Fatal Push in his main deck, as well as a Shock, and of course the 4 Unlicensed Disintegration that are common to all these Mardu Vehicles decks. So when you're planning out this combat math, you do need to think about, okay, what if my opponent has interaction on the following turn? How can I plan a race? How can I evaluate, playing safe versus, walking into potential removal spell, throwing off my math.
Paolo carefully considering his options here. Does crew the Heart of Kiran, leaves back the Veteran Motorist, so it can potentially crew on blocks as well. Gets a hit in. It's not quite as large as it would have been had he crewed with the Veteran Motorist, but 9 points of life, still a relatively low life total that Paolo can potentially attack in future turns. A Fatal Push, the pickup there from Donald Smith, also has a Scrap Heap Scrounger along with Depala Pilot's Exemplar. So a few options available to him here. Fatal Push, a great way of dealing with one or other of the creatures in play. And if he attacks and sees a crew from PV, then taking the biggest threat off the board feels great, though we do know that Paolo would be able to then immediately replace it.
No mana.
Courier picking up another letter, the letter bug swinging in for a second time. And even though it's just a 1-1, there's not really a good way of eating it here. There are just more exciting things to block.
So this actually is a lethal attack here from Donald Smith. I think that's 11 points. Paulo goes for the crew. Fatal Push takes out the Heart of Kieran. And I think that's 11 coming through, right? 4 from the Toolcraft Exemplar, 3 from Thalia, 3 from Dapala, and 1 from the Bomat Courier.
Donald Smith picks it up. It seems like thus far, uncharacteristically for this matchup, being on the draw is fine. We saw the power of Thalia Heretic Cathar. We will get a chance to see the power of the sideboard cards in this matchup soon enough, but we're going to get a chance to jump back and see a little bit more of our other matchup going on here, that between Liu Yuchen and Eduardo Sajgalik. Yuchen with just a monster draw in the first game. Let's see whether or not he can make history repeat itself and advance 2-0 in these pre-sideboarded games. We have heard that there's been more mulligans. Liu seemed to like being on 6 so much in game 1 that he's done it again. Meanwhile, Eduardo said, you know what, being on 5 was terrible. I'm going to start on 7 and see how that works out. On the play with Toolcraft Exemplar and no play on turn 1 from Liu Yuchen. This a much stronger start from Eduardo because he does have the Heart of Kieran on turn 2, swings for 3 and potentially threatens a lot more in the next turn.
Your turn.
Well, the 6-card hand from Liu Yuchen does have lands and, well, it's not much of a blocker, but it's a great creature for crewing vehicles. Scrap Heap Scrounger, if it dies off, it comes back, and with 3 power, it can crew Heart of Kieran. That one of the sort of key features. I mean, we actually have more Scrap Heap Scroungers in our top 8 even than we do Heart of Kieran, and Heart of Kieran, one of the most potent cards in this Pro Tour. Another Scrap Heap Scrounger coming down, crewing Heart of Kieran, big attacks from Eduardo. He wants to close this game out fast before Liu Yuchen can recover. But lands coming aplenty. That Scrap Heap Scrounger can't block, so it might as well get stuck in here.
Sure. 17.
Eduardo simply says sure, dropping to 17 and looks on as there's Dapala, Pilot Exemplar, 3-3, Dwarf Lord, but also kind of the Lord of all the vehicles. There is an Unlicensed Disintegration in hand for Liu Yuchen, but I'm not sure he has the mana to cast it right now. He has access to blue, white, and red. Needs to find some black mana if he's going to be able to play one of the cards that's very potent in this matchup.
Crew with the Scrounger. Yes. Trigger. Yeah.
So we see Eduardo coming in for 7 points of damage here with Toolcraft Exemplar and Heart of Kieran. Liu Yuchen has the option to trade off his Dapala. If he doesn't, going down to 3, of course, being very dangerous life total here given the presence of Unlicensed Disintegration, so wisely decides to trade there.
It's not even a trade.
It's not even a trade, actually. Yeah, there's 3 artifacts in play, so Toolcraft Exemplar had first strike there as well. So Liu just protecting his life total here, but very, very dire situation for Liu. Let's take a look at his hand. He has an Unlicensed Disintegration to interact a little bit, but unfortunately can't play that in another spell in the same turn, so opts to go for Veteran Motorist plus Heart of Kieran. That kind of enables his Scrap Heap Scrounger to block by crewing the Heart of Kieran in a way, but still leaving him in a very, very vulnerable spot, especially given the Fatal Push that we know Eduardo has in his hand. So I think we're going to see Eduardo actually setting up a lethal attack here this turn.
Yeah, Eduardo has had everything lining up fairly well. Liu Yuchen never drawing black mana. The mana base of this deck is very, very potent, but at the same time, when you've got kind of 3.5 colors to work with, sometimes it's tough. Implement of Combustion there, the play for Eduardo Sajgalik. He said that when I was speaking to him before this top 8, that was kind of a concession to the match against Saheeli Rai. It is a way of having an onboard answer to the big combo with Feldar Guardian. Ultimately, he felt it was a bit of an awkward metagame read, given how things turned out, but it also does let him cycle through his deck. It's an artifact to have him play. A little bit of damage, certainly not the end of the world, and right now, if anyone's world is ending, it's likely to be Liu Yuchen, because he is very much on the back foot in this second game.
Another note is it actually triggers Revolt for Fatal Push as well. Eduardo, I think, is the only Mardu Vehicles player we have in the top 8 here who's main decking for Fatal Pushes. So it's an extra way to make that, effective against things like Kalitas and Mindrack Demon and such. But anyway, here we have Eduardo setting up for the attack here. He is still sitting on that Fatal Push there, so if Scrap Heap Scrounger decides to crew Heart of Kieran, the Heart will get pushed before it can block. And looks like we have 9 points of damage coming in with the Cultivator's Caravan and the Heart of Kieran.
And effectively, this Heart of Kieran having to get crewed here because the Scrap Heap Scrounger was never going to be able to block itself. Fatal Push, meaning there's only the one blocker available, only one block that can keep Liu Yuchen alive, and it leaves him with a very thin board indeed. And a follow-up play of a Thraben Inspector for Eduardo Sajgalik. Just all the cards on the table, waiting to see whether or not Liu Yuchen can do anything to get out of this. And I don't know if there's actually a card in his deck that would be able to get him out of it at that point. You see at the bottom of our screen there, the advantage bar, well and truly on Eduardo Sajgalik's side. Sometimes it's tough to tell who's winning. In that case, I think it was fairly clear. These players will be going to their sideboards to be able to figure out what to do next. But we're going to jump across the other match and have a think about the sideboarding that's going on for our match between Donald Smith and Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa. There you can see some of the crowd just getting together, getting ready to watch more games here. I'm sure that we will see plenty of more players coming along to watch as we get closer to our finals, and a few side drafts going on also there. You can see Hall of Famer Ben Rubin. But we're going to get a chance to look at some sideboards now between our main match. Here's Donald Smith's Mardu Vehicles sideboard. The two cards that really stand out to me here are Gisela the Broken Blade and Sky Sovereign Console Flagship. Do aggro decks kind of want to go a little bit bigger in post-sideboard games, do you think?
In some cases, yes. I'm actually not sure if we'll see the Sky Sovereign here. I think we'll definitely see the Gisellas. Those are huge, especially being 4-power first strike and having lifelink matches up really well against Heart of Kieran and is able to set up race situations. It's also fairly difficult to remove. It doesn't die to shock. It only dies to Fatal Push if Revolt is active. The other cards I think we'll see come in are Fatal Push and Shock. You just want those 1-mana tempo-oriented removal spells. Fatal Push, of course, being adept at taking out opposing Hearts of Kieran, especially gaining extra tempo both on the mana advantage and if a creature had to be tapped to crew it in the first place. And then Shock, just a great way for catching up against, those aggressive Toolcraft Exemplar starts. So I think we'll definitely see the two Gisellas, the Fatal Push, and the Shock come in. And then, as you said, you speculated a little bit, we might see the Sky Sovereign come in, although I have a feeling that might be a little bit slow. Maybe it's something that comes in when you're on the play, but not on the draw. But I'm on those first 5 cards there that I mentioned.
A quick question for you, Ian. Fragmentize. It's a card that destroys artifacts, and there are a lot of powerful vehicles in the Mardu Vehicles deck, as one might expect based on the name. Is there a reason why you wouldn't think about bringing that one in?
The reason you wouldn't think about bringing it in is it is a removal spell, but it doesn't answer everything. You could certainly fall behind to a start that just involves a bunch of Toolcraft Exemplars, Veteran Motorists, and Depalas. It's definitely great for taking out vehicles, but I think you want the full number of copies of Fatal Push before you start thinking about Fragmentize. That being said, it's something that you might bring in one of, you might bring in both of. It's sort of just an option that you have, but it's not necessarily a guarantee, I think.
All right, well, let's take a look at what Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa has going on. These decks, on the face of things, the same archetype, but we see some very different options available here. What stands out to you for Paulo's sideboard here, Ian?
Release the Gremlins is an option in the same sense that Fragmentize is an option just to take out some artifacts and get a little bit of an advantage there, although it is a little bit on the slow side. Definitely, again, the Fatal Pushes I think we'll see come in here, but largely Paulo's sideboard doesn't seem as geared for the mirror match as Donald Smith's does.
Lovely stuff. Well, I think the players are just about ready to go. Let's head down to our feature match area as we get a chance to see some post-sideboard games between Hall of Famer Paulo Vitor Damo de Rosa of Team Channel Fireball Ice and his opponent Donald Smith of Team Lingering Souls. Looks like Paulo kicking things off with Spy Buff Clenal, one of the slightly more awkward lands in his deck if he's not casting Metallic Rebuke. Makes casting some of his spells a little bit trickier, and no 1-drop also not exactly where you want to be. Hearts of Kieran does come along on turn 2, but you can see that Toolcraft Exemplar in hand. He's not had a chance to cast it yet because he's not had white mana available. Meanwhile, Thraben Inspector coming from Donald Smith, and we get a chance to see what the follow-up is from him. It looks like we may have a Scrap Heap Scrounger from him, but first an attack here, unimpeded, of course. Another option, of course, being Veteran Motorist. He does have the Sky Sovereign Console Flagship.
Okay, you called it, Tim.
I mean, I guess if you're looking for a big threat, that is pretty much the biggest that is going to get deployed in this matchup. It doesn't get killed by a Fatal Push. It kills something when it comes in, and when it attacks, it is just gigantic. So PV having to take a point here to make the mana to cast Veteran Motorist, but it will be able to crew that Heart of Kieran, and Heart of Kieran will be able to attack for a full 5 points of damage here. I'm really intrigued to see how this game shapes out. It seems like we have quite a few sort of moving parts in this matchup. I like how interactive this matchup is, even though it is a race.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said in terms of the combat math and planning out races, and then factoring in, instant speed interaction like Shock, like Fatal Push, Unlicensed Disintegration, and especially post-sideboard. As we talked about, a lot of the cards that the players are going to bring in against each other are, of the interactive instant speed element here. So there's going to be a lot of math and combat planning going on.
Now, if you're sideboarding with a deck like this, maybe if you're taking it to FNM or playing it in a sort of another event on Magic Online, something that is always a bit of a worry for me is, what are you taking out? Because you need to be careful not to remove too many threats if you're just bringing in removal, right?
Yeah, I think probably trimming a little bit on the more expensive creatures is where I'd be looking here. Again, you want to preserve those 1-drops, make sure you're getting off to a quick start here, but you're probably trimming the top end of your curve in general to bring in more quick, low mana cost interaction.
Toolcraft exemplar there, the play from Palavitor down at Rosa, using that to crew Heart of Kieran, meaning that Veteran Motorist can help it out on blocks. And that means that there's not really a great set of attacks here for Donald Smith unless he can find a removal spell for the big legendary vehicle. He does swing in with Scrap Heap Scrounger. Is this kind of a little bit of a suspicious attack? It's a 3-2 attacking into a 4-4.
Yeah, that's definitely suspicious, I think, in general. Could be signaling an Unlicensed Disintegration before blocks. I don't think you would make this attack if all you had was a Shock here, so I'd definitely be reading into Unlicensed Disintegration at this point if I were in Paulo's seat.
And Paolo looks like he is thinking about the block with Veteran Motorist here. That means that he smells something's up. Unlicensed Disintegration. One of the reasons that Mardu Vehicles is a thing rather than simply red-white vehicles, having that access to the super powerful removal spell, just helpful in just about every matchup. And when you're racing, 3 points of damage is just spectacular. Veteran Motorist here to play.
That was a pretty cool block from Paulo. I mean, normally you wouldn't want to think about trading off your creatures for Scrap Heap Scrounger since it can come back from the graveyard, but of course there's no other creatures in Donald Smith's graveyard right now, and Paulo, his plan is to attack in the air with Heart of Kieran, so he may not be putting Donald in a situation where Donald can trade off his extra creatures or chump block with them. Also, thinking about mana curves in the deck, 3 is potentially a weak spot on the mana curve for these Mardu Vehicle decks. There's not a whole lot there aside from Depala or Unlicensed Disintegration. So, Paulo may be thinking, okay, I'll trade off here. I won't play into the Unlicensed Disintegration on my Heart of Kieran, and then on my turn I'll just develop more threats and maybe get ahead on the board. As it stood, Donald Smith actually had the 2-drop plus 1-drop, the perfect curve as we talked about earlier on, and was able to get back on board there after the trade. But still, I think a very heads-up play by Paulo to be thinking about that line.
And of course, with Thraben Inspector plus Veteran Motorist rather than Unlicensed Disintegration, one thing that there is the potential for from Donald Smith is if he can do what we can see Damo de Rosa has in hand, play a land, play a Gideon, and start looking at going wide and pumping up that team. There's the Gideon from Palavitor Damo de Rosa. Comes down, immediately bringing with it a Knight Ally token. Getting extra blockers here. 2-2 versus the 1-2 Thraben Inspectors looks pretty positive. 2-2 versus the 3-1 Veteran Motorist also looking fairly good. And Donald Smith, it looks like he's sideboarded relatively heavily here because I think that he has just drawn another one of his sideboard cards. We talked about the potential for artifact removal, and yes, as we look at his hand, we do see that Fragmentize.
Yeah, and again, it may seem kind of strange that I was questioning bringing in Fragmentize, but this is sort of an example where it's okay, but it's not great because, Paulo was able to advance his board in the form of a Planeswalker, in the form of some non-artifact creatures, and yeah, Fragmentize can take out that Heart of Kieran, but it still doesn't deal with that big board presence that Gideon is providing here. So Donald's draw just a little bit awkward here. I really, again, I want to call back to the way that Paulo navigated that last sequence of 2 turns where he didn't play into the Unlicensed Disintegration on his Heart of Kieran, so he was able to get an extra attack in with it and then untap and play Gideon into a field of just creatures. Donald Smith has no flying vehicles here, so he really can't push through very well and answer that Gideon. He's just kind of on the back foot now while Gideon pumps out advantage turn after turn.
And if you're Palavitor Damo de Rosa and you see Donald Smith cracking a clue on his own turn, that must be like blood in the water, right?
Yeah, in some sense, it's a very mana inefficient way. Like, it's mana efficient in the sense that it doesn't advance his board at all. And when you're sitting back defending a Planeswalker of your own, that's exactly what you want to see out of your opponent. You want to see them spending mana to put more cards in their hand rather than getting a board advantage there, because every turn that Gideon sticks around is just going to be more and more snowballing the advantage for Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa. That said, Fragmentize taking out Heart of Kirin, Paulo also doesn't have a lot of offense here, so this is still very much anyone's game, but I like Paulo's spot quite a bit here.
And Scrap Heap Scrounger means that there will be an artifact on the battlefield such that Unlicensed Disintegration fully live for him, even if he has to tap his Spire of Industry to cast it. Adds loyalty to Gideon, goes to attacks, and even Toolcraft Exemplar attacking for 3 here, signaling lots of trades on the other side of the thing, or lots of blocks on the other side of the thing from Donald Smith. He's got to protect his life where he can. He knows that he's got some big threats in hand, but what he doesn't have is time.
Yeah, it's pretty astounding to see, Paulo already switching onto the offense here and just putting pressure, forcing trades and chump blocks out of Donald Smith. So Donald's going to have to come up with something pretty good pretty soon here. And, I can't help but think that he is a little bit penalized for having that Sky Sovereign in his hand. It's a powerful card, but it's a little bit on the slow side. And with all these kind of clunky reactive cards and clunky power cards that Donald's drawn, he's just sitting back in a position where he's answering Paulo's threats, but he's not really developing his own board or putting pressure on that Gideon, and that's just not where he wants to be.
Now, one of the things that I liked about ticking up Gideon there was with 4 loyalty, it's potentially a little bit open to getting pinged off by a small attack plus Unlicensed Disintegration. This way around on 5, it's that much harder for that to be achieved. Thalia comes down, but almost immediately gets killed off by an Unlicensed Disintegration from Paulo, and the door might be open here for him to close out this game pretty quickly.
1, 2, 3.
Looks like we're just double checking to make sure that everything is in order here. A little bit of a discrepancy between the 2 players' life totals.
Oh yeah, he's saying you missed one. Okay, sure. Yeah.
We're all good here though. Paulo draws for the turn, and he's in the happy spot of being able to just sort of pick his poison for how he wants to end this one. Ticks up Gideon, does the big swing in. There's a forced block from Donald Smith. He's alive, but he has to look on as a Heart of Kirin comes along from Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa. Lots for Donald Smith to do. He says, nope, you got this one. Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa taking the lead in that match. 2-1. This is best of 5, so he has to win 1 more. But Donald Smith now in the unenviable position of having to win 2 games on the bounce against Hall of Famer Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa. So we're going to get a chance to jump across in a moment to see the sideboarding in our other match. But in the meantime, just taking a little tour around the room, you can see there are traders in the marketplace here in Dublin. Local guys that were able to sell you a whole bunch of different bits and pieces, magic paraphernalia there, some brand new Planeswalker hoodies along in our magic marketplace. Lots going on, plenty of drafting. We get to see what's happened in that earlier draft there. Look who's winning this match. We're going to get a chance to see that soon enough. But you know what? I think it might be time for us to figure out how things are going to go on sideboards for our second match going on here in the second stage of our quarterfinals. Liu Yuchen first. He's got a couple of Chandra going on. Gideon. This looks like a sideboard that's kind of best against control, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree. The Planeswalkers there, I think, are to bring in for the control matchups. I don't think we'll see those supplementing his deck here. Fragmentize, again, a card that can come in some numbers, 1 or both. Fatal Push, definitely going to come in here. Love that instant speed interaction. Really good at taking out Heart of Kirin. I don't think, on the other hand, though, Declaration Stone is a card that's going to come in here for him. It can come in. It is a good answer to Scrap Heap Scrounger, but it's a very poor answer to Vehicles. It's not really giving you a mana advantage versus the things you expect to kill with it, and its sorcery speed. So all those things combined, I don't love it in this matchup, although it's certainly reasonable to consider here. And then, of course, we have the Sky Sovereign, which, again, I don't necessarily love. It's not an automatic bring it in for me because it is 5 mana, because it is pretty clunky, but on the other hand, it is very powerful. There's only 1 copy there, so you can definitely make a case for bringing that in as just a haymaker if the game goes a little bit longer. All
right, well, let's take a look at what Eduardo Sajgalik has going on. All of these different Mardu Vehicles sideboards very sort of different options been picked up by each player. Spell Queller, an option for Eduardo Sajgalik. While I don't think that we would like to see any of the other counter magic, is this one, given it's stapled onto a 2/3 flyer, a little bit more attractive?
I definitely don't think so. You don't want to be playing a reactive game. You just want to be deploying your threats as quickly as possible. And, if you leave up a Spell Queller, your opponent doesn't play into it, you're in really poor shape from there. It's probably only countering a 1 or 2 mana spell in many cases, and a 2/3 body just isn't very large in terms of blocking these huge vehicles. So I definitely don't like Spell Queller in the matchup. Fragmentize definitely can bring it in some number of copies. Fumigate I do not like here because, again, it doesn't deal with vehicles. It's very slow. I think that's probably there more for more traditional creature decks like black-green. Shock I like. Good at answering those early, 1 and 2 drop creature starts. And we don't see any fatal pushes here in Eduardo's sideboard, even though that's one of the best card. And the reason for that is he has 4 copies in his main deck. So I think Eduardo's sideboard here is a little bit less set up for handling the mirror match because his main deck is better for handling the mirror match.
Lovely stuff. Well, let's head down to our feature match area and see how that plays out. Eduardo Sajgalik up against Liu Chen here in our second stage of quarterfinals.
Always? I know.
Liu Chen on the play has Thraben Inspector, not the perfect 1-drop, but even your second choice 1-drop is still very important. Any 1-drop you can get, great. And of course, getting an artifact in play turns on a lot of extra options for this deck. Hits in for 1 here. And where is our follow-up? It looks to be a Veteran Motorist with a Scry 2. Liu already with Fragmentize, Shock, and he's got Metallic Rebuke in hand here. The Rebuke, an interesting one, obviously powered up by that clue. No blue mana just yet, but that could be a real surprise for Eduardo Sajgalik down the line.
Yeah, to me it's a little bit of kind of flair or style in the matchup where I don't think by default it's a great card to have in here. Again, you don't really want to be playing a reactive game where you're sitting back and waiting for your opponent to play stuff. But that said, it can really throw things off in combat. If your opponent leaves up 3 mana relying on playing an Unlicensed Disintegration or something like that, and then you just counter it for 1 mana with Metallic Rebuke, that can send you way ahead. So it's kind of more of a surprise card than a default card that I would bring in this matchup.
Well, Sajgalik has the Heart of Kiran, but no creatures early on, so it's just going to have to float up there, get hit by a Fragmentize, and Liu Chen getting the early hits in here. And with threats on the battlefield, that kind of where counter magic might be at its best here, because he may not need to deploy quite so much to the board, and will have the opportunity to just say no at the appropriate moment. Lets that Heart of Kiran in. While there's no creatures to crew it, it's simply a balloon in the sky to look down on what Liu Chen's got going on.
So this is a really tricky situation for Liu. I think he's unsure if he wants to counter the Heart of Kiran or not, and if he decided not to there, he kind of tipped his hand a little bit. Oh no, okay, so he also has the option of spending his mana to crack the clue there as well. So I was going to say, he may have sent a little bit of a signal there that he may have Metallic Rebuke, although I wouldn't expect it if I were in Eduardo's shoes there. But you kind of have to make a quick decision when your opponent plays a spell like that, whether you're going to counter it or whether you're not going to counter it, because if you sit there and think, you're really kind of sending that message that, hey, I have a counter spell here.
I think he covered it well by cracking the clue there, basically sort of saying, this is what I'm thinking about, not anything else. Sajgalik, plenty of cards in hand. He's got Gideon, and it looks like he finds 1 more land. He will be able to deploy the Planeswalker. Scrapheap Scrounger would be able to crew our Heart of Kiran, and that one also coming down. Yes, we will see a hit from the big legendary vehicle, thanks to just a super powerful construct that we've seen all over this Pro Tour.
So that was another opportunity where Metallic Rebuke could have countered the Scrapheap Scrounger there, preventing the Heart of Kiran from being crewed. The problem with that is if Eduardo had a 4th land and another 3-power creature, then the Heart of Kiran is going to become active there anyway. So Liu just being a little bit patient here with that Metallic Rebuke, maybe setting up to counter an Unlicensed Disintegration mid-combat or something along those lines, and definitely leveraging the fact that he was able to get on board a little bit earlier here, and then kind of sit back on the reactive spells.
Speaking of reactive spells, Eduardo Sajgalik taking a point from his Spire of Industry, but getting the red mana he needs to cast cast Shock on Veteran Motorist. And this a point where Liu Chen says, all right, I'm willing to expend my Metallic Rebuke, keeping threats on the battlefield, keeping that pressure up. Able to knock Eduardo down to just 6 points of life here, and that's a pretty precarious number because there is a little bit more reach from these decks after sideboarding if they're bringing in things like Shock.
Yeah, fairly good use of the Rebuke there, able to trade 1-for-1 with the Shock and get in essentially 4 points of damage in some sense, because the Spire of Industry had to be tapped there. So really putting the pressure on Eduardo's life total here. And I like that play from Lou because if you had a chance to take a look at his hand just a short while ago, he is pretty flooded here on lands with only a shock as his last non-land card here. So I think he knows he needs to end the game before Eduardo's sort of more powerful hand, more powerful card quality here takes over the game.
Skywhaler's shot dealing with veteran motorists, so pretty much blunting all of Liu Yuchen's attacks here. But at the same time, the pickup for Sajgalik this last turn was a second copy of Gideon. He still doesn't have a fourth mana, so that one more or less a blank at this stage in the game, and there's not too many of those you can afford to give your opponent in this stage in the game.
So pretty cool here for Lou. He's basically out of gas here. Just a shock in hand, just a Thraben Inspector on the battlefield. But those two cards together represent 3 damage. So if he ever top decks an Unlicensed Disintegration, he will need another artifact to get that going as well. But again, potential to put Eduardo to that key 3 life threshold there.
Draws another Metallic Rebuke, and to be honest, at this point, he'd rather be drawing threats because he does just need to do a small amount of damage. Thinking carefully before swinging in with the Thraben Inspector. Eduardo may well feel like he's kind of dodged a bullet here. He's taken almost all of the attacking potential away from the Chinese player, but we know that there's the potential. There's a small amount of burn. These little attacks still very, very relevant.
Yeah, and I have to say, Tim, seeing this game play out here makes me question bringing in the Metallic Rebukes. They're nice utility to have, but if you think back for the first couple turns of the game, there were a couple moments where Lou just left mana up for the Rebuke and just ended up not casting anything at all. And finally, after the third opportunity, he cast it. Now he's top decked the second one, which isn't super useful to him right now. And if that had just been a threat that he played proactively, with Eduardo at 5, I can easily imagine him having closed out the game. Life total wise by now.
Well, Eduardo had to take a point from his Spire of Industry to try and cast Veteran Motorist there. Metallic Rebuke saying, no, you're not going to get that one on the battlefield. And each point that Spire of Industry deals at this point is a very big deal for Eduardo Sajgalik, dropping to 3 points of life. And we know that 3 is one of the magic numbers that this deck can dish out very, very easily. Though worth noting that there is no artifact in play for Liu Yuchen, so his Unlicensed Disintegrations right now, and there is one in hand, do not achieve as much as he might like.
Okay, but yeah, having that Unlicensed Disintegration means any top decked artifact, it's not immediately lethal because Eduardo of course has no creatures on the battlefield, but it does mean that Eduardo would have to win the game, essentially without exposing himself to the Unlicensed Disintegration. So Liu Yuchen really looking for an artifact here and does come up with a Scrap Heap Scrounger, which not only is a great threat with 3 power there representing lethal, but also can come back from the graveyard so that it's kind of sticky on the battlefield for purposes of the Unlicensed Disintegration.
Yeah, Eduardo Sajgalik, he does have the opportunity to bring back Scrap Heap Scrounger in order to cure Cards of Kiran, but that enough to provide a target for our Unlicensed Disintegration. Liu Yuchen picking up his second game win, the first post-sideboard game, going to the Chinese player. 2-1 to him. He needs to win one more if he's going to take this match, and puts himself in great spot here in the top 8 of Pro Tour Aether Revolt. Of course, these games falling thick and fast here in our feature match area. We get to jump across and see even more magic in Duke as we have Palavitor Damo de Rosa up against Donald Smith from the USA on our other table. Let's jump across and see whether or not we can see how things have been going for them. Smith from Team Lingering Souls up against one of the consensus powerhouse teams of this team series here at the Pro Tour, that being Channel Fireball Ice, and Palavitor Damo de Rosa flying the flag for them. You can see the shirt that he's wearing there. Lingering Souls, a very popular card and a team that is really performing well here. Getting a player in the top 8, just a fantastic achievement for any of these teams. This is where the really big pro points come, and that means that Team Lingering Souls has to be pretty happy with where they're sat at this stage in the burgeoning first season of the team series.
Yeah, the team series just making this whole weekend extra exciting, from my perspective, and I think from the perspective of a lot of the players out there. It just feels great to know that there's other people in the tournament, competing with you, alongside you, that you're, whatever accomplishments you make go toward your team, for the rest of the season. So there's really a lot on the line here, not just from an individual standpoint, but also for these players representing their teams.
And things kicking off now. Toolcraft Exemplar for Smith. On the other side of things for Palo Vitor Damo Rosa, it's a Thraben Inspector. Is there a turn to Artifact? No, we just have Veteran Motorist here coming from Smith, so he gets to Scry 2, and that means that his potential draws will get a little bit better. We get to see, though, that Palo Vitor Damo Rosa right now does not have a second land in hand. We saw this a little bit in his matchup against Jan Cassander in the first stage of the quarterfinals. There were a couple of games there that got spoiled by players not able to get their mana base working. If he is able to get a second land, he still has a bit of work to do. Shock will need the red mana. Scrap Heap Scrounger is easy enough to cast, but Unlicensed Disintegration right now, both a red and a black mana off being cast.
Yeah, tough situation. Looks like Paulo kept a 1-land Thraben Inspector hand on the draw and has missed his land 3 times now.
Heart of Kirin coming along. That meaning that the Toolcraft Exemplar able to attack for 3 here. No blocks from Palo Vitor Damo Rosa. He's in rough shape. Drawn up Fatal Push there. Lots of powerful cards. And oh, sorry, the Fatal Push was in Donald Smith's hand. We do have the second land for Palo Vitor Damo Rosa, but that Shock still not doing a huge amount for Palo Vitor. He's just surveying the scene. I think the only thing that he can cast this turn is going to be Scrap Heap Scrounger, but it may be more use to him to just hold up mana.
Yeah, holding up mana there could make Donald Smith fearful of activating his Heart of Kirin. Does not, in fact.
The other thing is, of course, he can crack a clue, and to be honest, he desperately needs to if he's going to draw himself out of this problem. Already on 10 life, and Thalia Heretic Cathar closing the door to a large amount of the lands that Palo could draw, though his clue did turn into a land. We do have an Inspiring Vantage. None of these things enough, though. A very quick game there for Donald Smith, able to make it 2-2. This one we're going to Game 5.
Yeah, exciting stuff here, Tim. These games are blisteringly fast.
And Palo Vitor really doing this top 8 on hard mode in as much as his first round. And he will have to play 4 rounds if he wants to win this tournament. His first round went to a full 5 games. This second round for him also going to a full 5 games. This is going to be a long day for Palo Vitor Damo Rosa if he's going to win this tournament.
And on top of that, being 8th seed, he's actually on the draw in all of his matchups, no matter what. So, again, as you said, hard mode as hard can be, I think, here, Tim.
We can see there's plenty of magic going on in our hall here in Dublin. A Gianni cosplayer there getting her game on. Plenty of magic. If you are in the Dublin area, do swing by. You can potentially get to play a little bit, or of course watch this top 8 as it unfolds. We've still got plenty more magic for you. Both Marcio Carvalho and Lucas Esperberto, because of their finish in the Swiss, haven't even had to sit down and play just yet. Few waves from the crowd there. Li Shiqian, he's enjoying watching this, of course supporting his MTG Mint card compatriot. Plenty of the MTG Mint card guys there, and our players still, I mean, for Liu Yu Chen and Eduardo Sajgalik, probably still just finishing up their sideboarding here because their game actually didn't take any time at all. Another cosplayer there, we've got Jace playing, all of the Planeswalkers getting their game on, and excited to see how these post-sideboarded games go for Mardu Vehicles, because everything that we're learning now is going to be relevant for the next few rounds that we watch as well, because at this stage in our top 8, it is all about the Mardu Vehicles. Looks like the players just drawing their opening hands. We may have a mulligan here from Eduardo Sajgalik. It does seem like on this second table, mulligans have been a little bit of a feature. How much of that do you think is about trying to hit just a mix of lands and spells, and how much is it about really optimizing getting the quick draw?
Yeah, good question, Tim. I think it's mostly about getting the right mixture of lands and spells, but keep in mind that these are decks that really only top out at 4 mana. So if you ever draw a hand that has, like, say, 3 spells and 4 lands, if your curve also isn't good, then I think you're sending that back. You know, so you want a combination of that quick 1-drop, 2-drop into maybe 1+2 on turn 3. And also, you know, enough lands as well. We saw last game Palo Vitor Damo Rosa getting stuck on a 1-land draw and really not having much time to draw out of that at all.
Well, it looks like that's the situation that Eduardo Sajgalik's in. Kept a 1-lander, scryed to the bottom. Meanwhile, Liu here does not have a turn 1 drop for the most punishing of starts. And it looks like he has also brought in the Declaration in Stone.
Wow, Eduardo frustrated there, having to pass back turn 2 with no second land there. You could see it in his hand motion there. He is not happy, but does top deck a second land here on turn 3, able to add to the board with Veteran Motorist. That Scry going to help him fix his draw going forward. And Liu Yuchen having actually a pretty reactive draw himself here. So although things not great for Eduardo, at least he's got a little bit of breathing room to draw out of this.
I mean, we need to play games of Magic at some point, right?
You hear Eduardo sort of saying, at some point he's going to be able to
Really tragic.
have a real game of Magic. I mean, the fact that neither of these players have been off to a blistering start, at least a little bit of comfort for Eduardo after his awkward draw. Pian La, the first play from Liu Yuchen, and that will, of course, mean a Thopter token for the Chinese player. Pian La, an interesting one. It gives you an artifact, which is obviously important for a lot of different pieces. It also lets you pump your vehicles that are often flying in. And, of course, getting rid of blockers. There's not too many that you need to get rid of in order to make sure that you're winning in races.
So Eduardo here finally making his third land drop. Things, again, a little bit awkward since he did miss his second land drop there. He sort of lost the advantage of being on the play. Now he's the equivalent of being on the draw and also sort of being down a card since he did choose to go first. So leaves up the 3 mana there, probably representing some sort of removal spell.
He does have Spell Queller in hand as well, though.
Oh, that's very interesting.
We saw counter magic from Liu Yuchen, also from Eduardo Sajgalik, as it turns out in this game. It looks like these players, I mean, sometimes we talk about aggro decks becoming mid-range decks after sideboarding. These aggro decks trying to be almost aggro control.
Yeah, very true. And if we take a look at Liu Yuchen's hand, these players both, defying my best expectations for how they might sideboard here, with Declaration and Stone actually coming in for Liu as well. And we saw the Metallic Rebukes last game. So Liu clearly trying to take a more controlling role in this matchup, answering his opponent's threats rather than just trying to race. So very, very interesting take on this. And I think there is a lot of play to the sideboards. I certainly didn't mean to say there's only one end-all, be-all way to sideboard these. There is definitely room to outsmart your opponent, to change your sideboard in between games, to keep your opponent guessing. Definitely a lot of stuff going on here. I actually wouldn't even be surprised to say, see Liu Yuchen maybe take out the Metallic Rebukes after he showed them in the previous game, just to keep Eduardo guessing. There's a lot of opportunity for psychology like that.
Lots of zigging, lots of zagging, and Spell Queller coming down here. Kind of a nice trump to what's going on from Liu Yuchen. At this stage, not being a counter spell, but simply being a removal spell for the 2/2 Pian La. 2/3 Flying Flash. 2/3 Flying Flash, perfectly reasonable against a 2/2 attacker.
Yeah, the other mode of Spell Queller being a 2-for-1, not capturing a spell this time, but capturing an attacker permanently.
It looks like Sajgalik with the pump fake there, thinking about Gideon Aliyev Zendikar this turn. Skyweller's shot in hand at present does not have removal spell, have a target, but the removal spell will be very potent as and when it does. We know there's plenty of options for it to kill off in the Mardu Vehicles list.
Gideon seems just great here for Eduardo. Able to slam a Gideon on a board where it's not really being threatened by a lot of opposing power. Just like that a lot.
Of course, these players both will, I'm sure, have spent a number of matches last couple of days playing against Mardu Vehicles, and then there will have been yesterday evening. Different mentalities on quite how much testing to do yourself versus relying on teammates there, but I can't imagine this sideboard is a coincidence.
So the one thing that Eduardo is probably thinking about here with Gideon is if he plays the Gideon and say he makes a Knight, then Liu Yuchen actually has the Thopter there, and if he has Unlicensed Disintegration as well, he can take out both the Spell Queller and then attack Gideon and take out Gideon. So, you'd love to just slam Gideon here on 4 here, just start pumping out Knights or whatever else, but Eduardo really thinking about this, because if Liu Yuchen does have that Unlicensed Disintegration, then his entire board will be gone next turn. And if we take a peek at Liu's hand, he does indeed have that. So the other option for Eduardo here is maybe play Gideon and then plus it up to 5 loyalty, but then you don't get any use out of it for the turn. So really kind of blunts the power of that play. And you can see just how much he's agonizing over this decision here.
I mean, is there any value in simply saying, I'm going to have an emblem, my beatdown as and when it happens is a little bit better, and your removal, if it's the likes of Shock, is a little bit worse?
There's some value in that, but I think that's kind of just, it's kind of just playing scared, honestly. I mean, with only one creature on the battlefield, and if you are truly fearing unlicensed disintegration from your opponent, that's the only reason you make that play, then your opponent would still be able to take out your Spell Queller and then maybe even add more to the board and start attacking you. So I like just going for the Knight here. Again, it's vulnerable to the unlicensed disintegration, but if you weigh the probabilities that your opponent may not have that, I think in the end it's just setting you up for the best chance to win.
Well, the unlicensed disintegration is there, that meaning that Liu Yuchen takes a turn off attacking Eduardo, admittedly just for one, and instead deals with the powerful Planeswalker. Just a Knight ally token on the battlefield now for Eduardo Sajgalik as he looks to pick things up as a follow-up Heart of Kiran comes from Liu Yuchen.
So this game playing out very, very differently than many other games we've seen so far here in the feature match area. Much more reactive. You know, these players kind of just trading cards back and forth. We're seeing things like Metallic Rebuke, Spell Queller, Sky Whaler's Shot coming in as just much more answer cards, and a much slower game in general too.
Liu Yuchen here, not with the requisite power to be able to crew his Heart of Kiran, at least unless he plays another creature right now. We can see that he does have Depala, Pilot's Exemplar, and that, of course, one of the best ways of crewing any vehicle. And given the way that this is turning into a slightly more controlling matchup, is this the first time that we're going to see Depala get paid for to potentially draw a card or two?
That's a very interesting point, Tim. Yeah, we haven't seen that at all this weekend, to the point where I've almost forgot about the ability, just because these decks so rarely have the extra mana to spend on it. But yeah, that absolutely could happen here. I'm not sure how many dwarves are left in the deck post sideboard, but yeah, you may as well take a peek and see what you get.
3 cards, land, Fatal Push.
Or at least 2.
I'm not sure that Liu Yuchen will mind too much putting 2 lands to the bottom, though pushing the Fatal Push maybe not quite so appealing.
I'd be shocked.
5 coming through, but it looks like Sky Whaler's Shot going to say no to Heart of Kiran. A quick scry to the bottom for Eduardo Sajgalik. Both of these players with plenty of land to work with, and there's a Cultivator's Caravan in hand for Eduardo, so he's going to have a lot more mana soon enough. Draws yet another land.
Yeah, a bit of an unfortunate draw there. I think Eduardo would love to see something like a Veteran Motorist off the top, just to get that extra scrying going, have a way to crew that Cultivator's Caravan, but is at least able to spend all his mana that turn with the Caravan into unlicensed disintegration, taking out Depala, shutting off that potential card advantage stream on the part of Liu Yuchen.
Yeah, Yuchen here, I mean, we talked about the potential to end up without very many threats after sideboarding if you bring in lots of answers, and it's kind of playing out a little bit that way for the Chinese player. I mean, step 1, he's flooded, he's drawing a lot of lands, but step 2, in terms of just closing out games, we've not seen an array of threats from him that makes that very straightforward. Declaration in Stone has yet to really have a compelling target. Sorcery speed, one big worry for Declarations in Stone in this matchup. It's tough to hit a vehicle with it, but on top of that, you're giving your opponent artifacts, and they're potentially going to be relevant for keeping unlicensed disintegration going, or at this stage in the game, simply drawing cards.
Yeah, I think the dream for Declaration in Stone is taking out like 2 Scrap Heap Scroungers or something along those lines. Here, just taking out a Gideon token. Doesn't feel great, but at least there's no clue being given for that. And then here we go. Here's that Veteran Motorist that I was talking about earlier. One of the best draws that Eduardo could see at this point. Allows him to crew the Cultivator's Caravan. He was able to scry, I think, 2 cards to the bottom there, just getting him further to see more gas. And now the ball is very much in Eduardo's court in terms of putting on pressure.
That's not a bad draw either.
Fragmentize, also a good draw there, says Eduardo Sajgalik. Deals with the Cultivator's Caravan. Scrap Heap Scrounger off the top for Eduardo. No attacks with that Veteran Motorist, not looking to simply trade with a Thopter. It's slight advantage here to Eduardo Sajgalik, as we can see on the bar down toward the bottom of the screen there. Just more points coming through on Liu Yuchen here. Both these players kind of living off the top of their decks.
Yep.
Yeah, and Eduardo definitely getting the better of that. I mean, that Veteran Motorist there was just absolutely huge. And here comes another one, setting things up with Liu Yuchen down to just 4 life, facing down 6 point of attackers. Nothing really to speak of in hand. And Eduardo just deciding his last scry here. But this has been just an amazing game of attrition here, Tim. Much, much longer, much different character than we've seen from these Mardu mirror matches thus far. And remember, this was the game where Eduardo kept a 1-lander and missed his second land drop. And yet, you know, we're still having this 10-plus turn game where Eduardo is able to kind of crawl back in here and outvalue his opponent.
Scrappy Scrounger, it comes down just to say hello. No blocking for that one, though. Eduardo Sajgalik gets the hit in. He'd left Heart of Kieran on the top of the deck, did not need it. And a big smile there from Eduardo. Very happy to escape after what looked to be a potentially catastrophic opening hand.
And this is great. We have both of our matches here in this quarterfinal stage 2 going to 5 games. It's going to come down to all of it here. And these have been good games too, Tim. You know, we predicted that being on the play would be a huge aspect here, or that, you know, being the one to mulligan would be a huge factor, but we haven't really seen that play out that much. Of course, it does matter here, but, you know, we're seeing players on the draw win, we're seeing players who took, you know, an extra mulligan win, and yeah, these have just been really fantastic games.
Great to see the hype coming from the crowd. I'm sure there's plenty of people watching in Twitch chat, maybe using some of the new subscriber emotes. If we can get a Wooberg hey from the chat, that would be great. But these players looks like they're getting off ready. They're obviously keen to start this match, the deciding game thereof. No turn 1 play from Paolo Vitor Damo de Rosa, whereas Toolcraft Exemplar still a feature in Donald Smith's deck. He does have it on turn 1, and that's kind of where he wants to be. There is a Heart of Kieran lurking in hand for Paolo here, but he may opt initially to just use Veteran Motorist in order to get a threat on the board and improve future draws. Sees, looks like a Thalia and a land there. Paolo, known for sort of being a real student of the game, really thinks very carefully about his decisions, but then, most importantly of all, and this is the reason he's got so many Pro Tour top 8s, he makes the right choice. Heart of Kieran on turn 2 from Donald Smith. This is the very straightforward, powerful Mardu Vehicles draw that really pushes a lot of people toward the deck. Gets a hit in for 3 thanks to there being an artifact in play with that Toolcraft Exemplar. And
Smith's hand looking fantastic here. He had that 1-drop Toolcraft Exemplar into Heart of Kieran, and then looking at his hand there, he's got Scrap Heap Scrounger plus a 1-mana removal spell to follow it up next turn. So absolutely fantastic start for Donald Smith there. Let's take a look at what Paulo has in store for us. Just picked up a Plains for the turn. He has access to Depala. He has a Heart of Kieran plus Fatal Push. Those are his 2 options here this turn. Actually, Fatal Push not even being an option here. No access to black mana, so I guess we'll just see that Depala come down. Other option would be just play the Heart of Kieran and then next turn play Depala and crew it and attack. But that's not making optimal use of mana here, so nothing too great here for Paulo. He's kind of in a tricky spot here, especially given how strong we saw Donald Smith's hand is.
It was an interesting block the previous turn with Veteran Motorist on that Toolcraft Exemplar. Not something you would necessarily always see, potentially saying a little bit about how Paulo sees this game playing out. He does have to look on as Scrap Heap Scrounger comes down. That a bit of a blow, because it does mean that there was still a way of crewing up Heart of Kieran, the big legendary vehicle getting to get a hit in here. Depala in play. All future dwarves will be that much more potent, as will the vehicles. And Paolo looks like he might be just simply getting stuck in with the 3/3 legend.
Looks like Paulo's pickup for the turn was Shock, which is interesting but not super effective here, in the sense that if he goes ahead and shocks that Scrap Heap Scrounger, there's already a Toolcraft Exemplar in the graveyard for it to come back. So not looking too effective here. Depala gets in. Her ability not used, of course, so that Paulo can leave up that 1 mana for shock purposes, and then Heart of Kieran coming down.
Worth noting that both these players do have access to deck lists, so something like Shock won't be too shocking to Donald Smith if it gets deployed here. In other matchups, there's a little bit more gamesmanship about maybe not showing off cards, but here it's a matter of making clear that, you know, you have these options. Veteran Motorist coming down for Donald Smith. He gets his Scry, and he has Unlicensed Disintegration in hand. He has all sorts going on. 3 removal spells plus threats on the board. Slight advantage already in this game going to Donald Smith, as Paolo Vitor Damo de Rosa drops to 8 life and has to look on as his best, well, his only artifact on the battlefield getting killed off. A flurry of removal on both sides, as we have Fragmentize and Shock clearing the board just a little bit, but things still looking rosy for Donald Smith here.
Really, really nice turn for Donald Smith. Definitely swung in the advantage there, just being able to play another creature, get in for a bunch of damage, and also play Fragmentize on Heart of Kieran. Leaves Paulo with really not too much going on here.
Yeah, his hand's all air, given the mana that he's got available. He doesn't have black mana for Unlicensed Disintegration or Fatal Push. Gideon, ally of Zendikar, not doing a whole lot based on 3 lands in play. Depala attacks and gets activated for just 1, so Paolo at least wants to signal that he could have something to Donald Smith. As things stand, though, Smith's attack's relatively straightforward. Crews up his Heart of Kieran, gets stuck in for 4, and that means that Paolo Damo Rosa has to find an answer right now. Finds a mountain. That will mean that he's able to cast Gideon, but nothing else. And I believe that means that Heart of Kieran is going to end things here for Donald Smith.
That's right, Tim. I think we're going to see Donald Smith advancing to the semifinals here. Very unfortunate here for Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa in terms of the awkwardness of his draw. No black mana. You can see, sort of the pain point of playing a deck that is 4 colors and has a somewhat awkward mana base is, sometimes you just get hosed on your colors. And Paulo just thinking about, is there any way I can set up a turn where my opponent maybe plays scared and doesn't activate the Heart of Kieran? Of course, if he just taps out for Gideon, he's saying, I have nothing, shields are down. But I don't think there's going to be anything really viable here for Paulo. I guess the best he can really do is maybe attack with Depala and pass the turn with mana up or something like that, and just hope and pray that Donald doesn't attack, but very, very slim odds of that.
Again, activating for 1. I like the activation for 1 because it makes it look very considered that you need to leave the rest of that mana up as opposed to simply tapping out. But there's the handshake, and you can see Donald Smith there looking kind of stunned. He's just taken down the 11-time Pro Tour top 8er, Paulo Vitor Damo Rosa. Congratulations to him. He's like, oh, we done? I get to play in the semi-finals now. This is fantastic, and you're absolutely right, Donald Smith. You are still in this tournament. There is still a hope for you to hoist the trophy here at Pro Tour Aether Revolt in Dublin. But we have a little bit more magic still enabled for this quarterfinals stage 2. Just one last game between the guy that was the last undefeated player here at this Pro Tour, that being Liu Yu Chen, and his opponent, Eduardo Sajgalik. A little bit of a smile there from Yu Chen. He's obviously having a fantastic weekend. He's got 5 GP top 8s behind him before, but this is his first Pro Tour top 8, whereas Eduardo Sajgalik there, this is his second Pro Tour top 8, and he was actually mentioning that with this top 8 and actually this performance in the top 8 thus far, I believe that this gets him up to 150 pro points, meaning that he will be eligible for the Hall of Fame. Oh, wow, no kidding. Great for him. Yeah, he's a player that's been around for a long while, been very successful at GP and PT level, currently a silver level pro, and he's kind of picked up his wins across the history of him playing the game, rather than it necessarily being that he had one really great season in order to lock up one of those higher pro levels. Looks like a mull to 5 here for Liu Yu Chen. That not where you want to be at this stage in the game, but you know what? Sometimes we've already seen it in this feature match area quite a bit today. There is the potential for the Mardu Vehicles deck to have an awkward mana draw, but looking at the mana for Eduardo here, it's kind of complicated for him too. He's got Aether Hub, he's got Spire Bluff Canal, but without that contested courtyard, his mana would be a little bit awkward there.
As it stands, Eduardo's hand looking great here. He's got turn 1 Thraben Inspector, turn 2 Veteran Motorist, turn 3 Cultivator's Caravan, also access to Unleashed Disintegration. This is just, not the absolute best draw, but you must be feeling very comfortable, especially when your opponent's mulliganing down to 5, I believe.
5 so far.
So, what Lou would love to see there is a 1-drop of his own
right now,
into Heart of Kieran, probably Toolcraft Exemplar into Heart of Kieran, then maybe with a piece of interaction would probably be the best that he's hoping for. He does have that Scry now with the new-ish Vancouver mulligan there to help him set things up a little bit here, but let's see what he does come up with.
Yep.
Looks like we do have a keep there, and we get to see it. Metallic Rebuke, then there is the Unlicensed Disintegration, a couple of lands, and Scrapyard Salvager there. So he's got playable cards. He is going to need a little bit of help if he's going to get into this game, but at least we are going to have a game here as our second quarterfinal stage 2 match is decided.
Gideon the pickup there for Sajgalik, so he's already got his first couple turns covered here, as well as access to 4 total mana. So actually not a bad pickup for him, even though it's not going to come out anytime soon. Adds a lot of power to the top of his curve here. And no blocking going to be happening from Liu Yu Chen anytime soon. Veteran Motorist coming down and allowing Sajgalik to scry 2. His draw already pretty solid, so being able to improve it even further just
turning the screws on our Chinese player, who is having a little bit of a rough one in this deciding game.
You can see we've shifted the advantage there in favor of Eduardo Sajgalik. Even though the game hasn't progressed very far, we know the quality of Eduardo's draw, and we know the fact that he was able to keep 7 versus Liu Yuchen keeping only 5 cards on the play. So really like the way things are shaping up here for Eduardo. Scrap Heap Scrounger can't block, so he might as well come in for 3.
Well, this game's weird.
Thrown Inspectors in hand for Liu Chen here, but not a great deal else that he's really able to cast.
Maybe I do. Like, that would have been one of them.
And if you're Liu Chen here, you've only got 1 energy on that Aether hub. What are you saving it for?
Well, he does have Unlicensed Disintegration in his hand, and that's his only source of red mana. So even if he hits a 3rd land, if it's not a red land, he would want to have access to that. But yeah, I mean, just adding the second 3-bit Inspector at the cost of your only colored mana from the Aether hub, I think is not really doing much for Liu Chen here. So he's just going to kind of hold on and hold his breath for his next draw here. And it's tough because he's looking for a land so he can unlock the cards he has in his hand, does find it, but even with that land there, he's just falling so far behind on board. We know that Gideon is going to come out next turn.
Yeah, there was the Cultivator's Caravan into Thraben Inspector for Eduardo Sajgalik. He's got the luxury of a bit of time and space to be able to play a couple of cards in one turn. Fragmentize does deal with the Cultivator's Caravan. That means that there's not quite so much power on Eduardo Sajgalik's side of the board.
Small correction there. I think we had previously shown 2 3-bit Inspectors in Liu Chen's hand. I think it was actually the 1 Inspector plus the Fragmentize is what it looks like there to me. So that leaves Metallic Rebuke and Unlicensed Disintegration in Eduardo's hand. Or sorry, in Liu Yuchen's hand.
Gideon, that is a tempting one to Metallic Rebuke, and it looks like this is the time that Liu Yuchen is going to use up that 1 energy with his Aether Hub. He is now, at least for the next sort of turn or so, going to be a black-white deck. No access to any other colors of mana, so yeah, not picking up a way of producing red mana for the Unlicensed Disintegration in hand, but dealing with the biggest threat that Eduardo Sajgalik had tried to deploy thus far this game.
Concealed Courtyard, a very, very poor draw there for Liu Yuchen. He doesn't really need any more lands except for the fact that he needs red mana. So top decking an extra land that does not produce red is pretty close to a blank here for Liu, and he really cannot afford to be missing draws like that.
Draws the Heart of Kiran off a clue. Now, Concealed Courtyard, it is going to come down here, but it comes down tapped, so it's not even as if he can play the big legendary vehicle that he's drawn. Meanwhile, Eduardo Sajgalik has another copy of Cultivator's Caravan. That immediately gets tapped in order to sacrifice a clue, drawing a Spire of Industry. Everything rocking and rolling for Sajgalik here. The advantage very much to him at this point. The only saving grace for Liu Yuchen is that right now Sajgalik not presently presenting a terrifying set of attackers. That could change very soon, though.
Yeah, that's right, Tim. And what we're really seeing here is the effect of those 2 mulligans on Liu Yuchen, as well as the fact that Liu was on the draw. Eduardo, aside from that, the board is fairly stable from Liu's standpoint here. Eduardo not really putting on a lot of pressure until he's able to untap with that Cultivator's Caravan next turn, but just the raw card quantity here is really starting to affect Liu. He does find his red land there that's going to unlock Unlicensed Disintegration next turn, but Eduardo, still just able to keep cracking those clues. He's got the time, he's got the extra cards, he's going to be able to get a hit in here with the Cultivator's Caravan, potentially.
Yeah, and Sajgalik also has 2 solid removal spells in hand. So even if Liu Yuchen is able to deploy some of the cards that he was stuck on early game, that does not necessarily mean that he's out of the woods just yet. Lots of clues thanks to those Thraben Inspectors for Eduardo Sajgalik. He gets to hold his mana up, potentially use removal. If not, he gets to spend that mana on drawing additional cards. And drawing additional cards, as we all know, one of the most fun things to do in Magic.
So Liu Yuchen at this point needs every single draw step to count. He needs to engage in a 1-for-1 game with Eduardo until he's able to kind of pull back in the lead. So he needs Eduardo to miss a bunch, and he himself needs to be hitting something relevant basically every single turn here until he can stabilize his position.
Well, that's the 4th Thraben Inspector, just one of the pickups for Eduardo Sajgalik alongside Scrap Heap Scrounger. He's got Unlicensed Disintegration and Fatal Push that we knew about. Commanding position, he's just going to have to piece together some attacks that are going to work out here. That Heart of Kiran at least giving a little bit of pause to Eduardo in terms of his attacking.
Well, we do know Eduardo has that Fatal Push, which is basically the perfect answer for for the Heart of Kieran. He knows Liu has a couple cards in hand that he hasn't played in quite a while. Unlicensed Disintegration is kind of at the top of that list that Eduardo must be suspecting because Liu Yuchen only for the first time unlocked his red mana this turn.
Yeah, Unlicensed Disintegration, because of its fairly prominent mana cost, is a card that you can look to play around. Ultimately, it's unconditional removal of a creature, but sometimes you can sort of finagle it such that your opponent doesn't have any artifacts in play at the right moment. And Unlicensed Disintegration here, just on a lowly Thraben Inspector.
This is a pretty aggressive play, but definitely clears the way here. You know, because the Scrap Heap Scrounger can't block, this would potentially allow that Cultivator's Caravan to get in for 6 damage here if Liu doesn't have a removal spell. And that is, of course, because as soon as the Heart of Kieran is crewed by the Scrap Heap Scrounger, it's going to meet a Fatal Push from Eduardo.
And there we have it, the 1 mana removal spell doing the trick.
And interestingly, Eduardo opted not to crew the Cultivator's Caravan and get in with it because he did so strongly suspect the Unlicensed Disintegration. And because Liu's so low on life total, he doesn't have the option to just kind of take this hit and leave it up again next turn for the Cultivator's Caravan. So really nice play there by Eduardo, preserving his big threat there and forcing Liu to use his Unlicensed Disintegration on a weaker target. And things are really, really wrapping up in this game here in favor of Eduardo Sajgalik. I don't think there's much Liu Yuchen can do to dig himself out of this hole.
Yeah, not too much in the way of mass removal in these decks. We know that Eduardo Sajgalik does have Fumigate in his sideboard, but this is not really the matchup for that. Liu Yuchen might as well get stuck in with that Scrounger. It's not going to be doing anything on blocks. Gideon Ally Zendikar comes down for Liu Yuchen, and he does immediately put a Knight Ally token into play, but on 7 life, he is in dire straits here, and it looks like a shock in hand for Eduardo Sajgalik. He gets to play another Thraben Inspector. Looks like he's immediately cracking the clue that it produces. Draws just an Aether Hub, but I mean, even looking at nothing else, he's drawn 4 extra cards with Thraben Inspectors. He's managed to scry with Veteran Motorist. He's also just started with more cards in hand. This is card advantage showing its worth here in an otherwise aggro matchup. Cruises vehicles, gets stuck in, and Liu Yuchen extends the hand. Big applause from the MTG Mint Card crew who have been watching in the bleachers. Congratulations to Eduardo Sajgalik, who successfully made it out of the quarterfinal stages, both 1 and 2. We will be seeing you in the semi-finals up against Lucas Esper Berto. We will also be seeing Marcio Carvalho against Donald Smith. Our quarterfinals are complete.
Pretty tremendous games there. I was glad to see both those series go to 5 games. A lot of good ones there. Different character in the game. Some were very fast about, you know, who just kind of came out of the gates with a great draw. Others came more down to card advantage or being more reactive, kind of outlasting the opponent. So quite a bit of different character there, despite, you know, seeing 2 mirror matches essentially.
Yeah, and really, really interesting to me to see the different takes on sideboarding that we had going on. There were a few surprises in both matches in terms of what came in. It seems like these games can be characterized by a lot of removal, but also a lot of potential to interact after sideboarding.
Yeah, very, very true. And different styles of sideboarding as well. We saw a lot of mixing things up. You know, Metallic Rebuke was cool to see, Declaration Stone, Sky Sovereign, cards that, you know, are options for sure, but you're not necessarily expecting to definitely see come in.
Yeah, so even though we have plenty more Mardu vehicles here for you in this top 8, nothing to say that at least after sideboarding there won't be quite a bit of variation. That is the end of our second stage of quarterfinals, though. Let's head things back to the news desk.
Hello everyone, welcome to the news desk. It's lunchtime here in Dublin at Pro Tour Aether Revolt. Rich Hagan alongside Brian David Marshall, Louis Scott Vargas. Welcome gentlemen. Lots to come your way during this lunch break. We're going to show you inside R&D, the final look inside the inner workings of Aether Revolt. Right here in these seats are going to be two gentlemen, Ryan Chapley and Eric Tam from Twitch. So that'll mean that Twitch chat can talk about Twitch chat. We're going to have a little chat about Twitch and the partnership with Magic. The three of us will be here to walk you through all the best teams, how they've done here at the first of the Team Series Pro Tours. 4 teams are still left to claim this first title of the new Team Series season, and then we'll mark your card for the first semi-final, which will be Marcio Carvalho against Donald Smith. But all that's still to come. First, let's look back on the morning that we've had and show you our top 8 bracket. It's a modified top 8 bracket that we started using at Pro Tour Kaladesh. 2 stages to the quarterfinals, and we began with the 5, 6, 7 and 8 seeds going at it in stage 1. So Jan Cassander against Paolo Damo Rosa. Luis, you were in the booth for that one. Went the full 5 games, but Paolo edged it.
He did. It was 5 blazingly fast games. Both players had some mana issues, 1 of peace, and then 3 just fast tempo games where that Paulo ended up on top.
Now, BDM, at the bottom half of the bracket, we had Martin User with Jund Energy Aggro against Eduardo Sajgalik's Mardu Vehicles. Now, the expectation was that Martin User's Jund Energy deck was actually pretty well suited against Mardu Vehicles. And as we looked ahead in the bracket, we saw Li Yuchen, Lucas Escobar 2, maybe Marcio Carvalho, or a Paolo, or a Donald Smith. Things look set up pretty beautifully for Martin User.
Yeah, throughout the Swiss, Martin was actually 4-1 against Mardu Vehicles in the tournament and had a great matchup, but he was really concerned about the Eduardo Sajgalik matchup because Eduardo was the only one of those decks packing a full 4 copies of Fatal Push main deck, which is just kind of brutal against his deck, which is very low to the ground, and you don't even have to turn on Fatal Push to kill almost all of the creatures in Martin's deck, and that's kind of how things played out. And Martin was knocked by the wayside, the people's hero here against this, his chance to play Grand Theft Auto and steal this tournament away from all the Vehicles decks.
Yes, so Sajgalik, in fact, didn't just advance, he advanced handily 3-0. And so that brought us to stage 2, at which point our 3 and 4 seeds entered the proceedings. Donald Smith, Mardu Vehicles, Li Yuchen of China, Mardu Vehicles. Well, Paolo Damo Rosa already got through 1 match. Could he get through another? Luis, 5 games, but not this time.
Nope, he got edged out by Donald Smith. At the end of it, Paulo's lacking black mana in Game 5, wasn't able to cast Fatal Push or Unlicensed Disintegration, and he eventually fell to a Heart of Kira and a Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Look, the clue's in the name, Mardu Vehicles. It's not red vehicles. So how rare is that sort of malfunctioning mana base, or is that a legitimate weakness of the Mardu Vehicles deck?
You tend to have the right colors because Concealed Courtyard, Spire of Industry, Aether Hub all do a really good job of getting you black mana. The price you pay is often your lands in a battlefield tapped because you do have Spire Bluff Canal, Inspiring Vantage, and Concealed Courtyard. In this particular case, though, Paulo's just missing black mana altogether. Doesn't happen all that often. Game 5 of the Pro Tour, not really where you want it to happen, but that's where he had it.
For sure. So then at the bottom half of the bracket, Eduardo Sajgalik, who'd already defeated Martin User, looked to defeat his first mirror of the day. This was China's Li Yuchen. 5 Grand Prix top 8s for the Chinese player, 25 years old. They went the distance as well. BDM, in the end though, Sajgalik advances. Absolutely,
he inspected Yuchen to death. He got the full set of Thraben Inspectors into play and was able to use them to, nibble away, power up his vehicles, and just clear the path with all the removal that was in his deck.
Luis, I'm not sure there are that many similarities between the San Francisco Bay Area and China, but one of them is that you and your friends in that area pulled together when Channel Fireball was just starting out and became a lot stronger than just the individual players that were involved. How important for Chinese Magic is seeing Liu Chen here on the highest stage?
It's got to be very motivational. He's got a lot of Grand Prix top 8s, despite not having quite as many opportunities as maybe players in other regions. And seeing someone succeed on the Pro Tour level is really important.
Yeah. So, congratulations to him. But it's Sajgalik who advances, which means that Donald Smith will go up against Marcio Carvalho. That'll be semi-final 1 in just a little bit. And then Eduardo Sajgalik will play our number 2 seed from Brazil, Lucas Esper Bertu. Mardu Vehicles all the way. It's start your engines through the semi-finals and finals after lunch. But all that's still to come. First, though, we're going to take a trip back across the Atlantic to Renton, Washington, the home of Wizards of the Coast, the home of R&D, research and development, the boys and girls who make magic magic. Here's part 3 of Inside R&D.
One of the cool things about being a magic designer is I get to make a lot of neat things. I get to make wondrous artifacts. I get to make big, glamorous spells. But probably the thing I like most of all is getting to make characters.
So Sram is a dwarf. He's the senior edificer of all of Girapur. He works for the consulate. It was his job to maintain this living, breathing city. He believes in the consulate, but he's torn now that Tezzeret is in charge, and he ends up in our story helping the renegades just enough to make a difference.
We refer to cards like SRAM, Senior Edificer, as enchantresses. They're kind of typical. There are a lot of cards in Magic's history that have the name Enchantress. There's a Argothian Enchantress, Verduran Enchantress, Mesa Enchantress. What they all have in common is they allow you to draw a card whenever you play an enchantment. It's actually really cool to really reward you for doing the Kaladesh thing. I know that I've been planning to build a SRAM Commander deck for quite some time too.
All right, so Captain Baral, we know him from Chandra's origin story. He is responsible for killing her father, framing her, actually igniting her Planeswalker spark by causing her all this distress. And he is basically Chandra's nemesis. He's here, he's wrapped around Tezzeret's finger, and he's more than willing to activate anytime Tezzeret asks him to tempt Chandra, to push her, to distract her, and he's wreaking havoc around Girapur for the duration of the story.
He's the guy that wanted Chandra executed, and he's one of the bad guys behind all this. And to play that up, we kind of wanted, what if you just put him in a really mean deck full of counter spells? So we kind of designed a card that would allow you to play just a ton of counter spells, just say no to everything your opponent did. We gave you the incident sorcery reduction to help you cast more counter spells, and we rewarded you for putting a bunch of counter spells in your deck. So you could say oh, I'm building a Baral deck. Nobody's gonna resolve anything.
Many, many years ago, when Magic's first expansion came out, before I worked at Wizards, there was a card called Cabal Ghoul. For 2 and a black, you got a 1/1 creature that whenever a creature died, you got a +1/+1 counter. I thought that was the most awesome card ever. And I feel like Yahenni really is Cabal Ghoul, but on steroids. So same cost as Cabal Ghoul, but instead of a 1/1, it's a 2/2. Instead of a 1/1, it's a 2/2. Oh, wait. And it has haste. Oh, wait. And you can sacrifice creatures to make it indestructible. So if you ever like Cabal Ghoul, this is like super Cabal Ghoul.
R&D likes having sacrifice decks around in Standard. But we've had some problems with cards like Nantuko Husk being sacrifice outlets that just kill your opponent all in one shot. So we wanted to bring a souped up Nantuko Husk, but it wouldn't kill your opponent in one shot. So it really is good at protecting itself, and kind of as the game progresses, you get to take advantage of the sacrifice outlet. So that's where Yahenni came from.
So Kari Zev is probably my favorite character in this set. Kari Zev is a young skyship captain who is also a pirate, and she has a legendary monkey named Ragavan, and the two of them in the story are actually going to team up with Jace. While the rest of the renegades are dealing with the Aether Hub and trying to take that from the consulate, Jace, Kari, and her monkey are going to actually raid consulate skyships for their Aether and try to find other means of doing that. And they're going to get wrapped up in all sorts of other problems, and they're going to eventually have to take on the consulate flagship, the Sky Sovereign, that you might remember from Kaladesh.
So Rishkar Pima Renegade is a good example of, even though we don't have Fabricate in the set, even though that mechanic we decided to put it aside to do some other mechanics, we still wanted you to have new cards to put in your decks with Fabricate. And we were trying to make a cool legendary elf, and we said, okay, here's what we can do. We can make use of +1/+1 technology, so it works all by itself, but you know what? It also plays nicely with your Fabricate cards.
Rishkar is a card that works really well by itself. It comes into play as a 3/3, it gives a never creature counter, and it lets them both tap for mana. But one of the things I love about Aether Revolt is sometimes even unassuming cards that look so powerful on their own are actually combo cards. I especially like playing Rishkar with Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. She gives all your creatures +1/+1 counters, and now they're all tapping for mana. I tried it out once with Animation Module from Kaladesh. That means every time you get a counter, you get more creatures, and then you add more counters to them. That's a lot.
A goal of the design team was to have a cycle of splashy, rare spells that did some kind of cool, kooky thing. And what we came up with, as a placeholder, mind you, was spells that they had their effect, and then they let you cast for free another spell from your hand that costs less mana. We were also simultaneously developing a cycle of legends. The world building team had given us a number of really cool profiles of legendary creatures, and they started to converge. We started to see, wait a minute, what if these were the signature spells of those characters? And we started to design them in pairs that each one then influenced the other one so they could go together and express these characters.
So Tezzeret, he's in a world that values artifice. He's a talented artificer himself, but also a very ambitious one, and also in the employ of Nicol Bolas. And when you combine all of these things, he positions himself to usurp the consulate. This is a continuation of the Kaladesh story, and we see him. His Planeswalker card shows him as the head of the consulate.
So Tezzeret, as you'd expect, is all about artifacts. His +1 gives you artifacts to fill up the battlefield with. His minus lets you get rid of your opponent's creatures, provided you have enough artifacts. Sometimes it'll even pump your own creatures, making them bigger to finish off your opponent. His ultimate, of course, is a throwback to previous Tezzeret's ultimates, in that it turns your artifacts into 5/5 creatures. I especially like this one because it lets you do it every turn. So you get to watch your opponent try and struggle to fight against your army of Ethereum cells that are now 5/5s.
One of the things that's key to this story is that Tezzeret is working for Bolas. But I didn't give anything away here. And we actually thought about reprinting Agent of Bolas because it was such a perfect example of Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas. Why don't we just reprint Agent of Bolas? But what we found was there were so many neat interactions with artifacts we got to do in Kaladesh that we actually kind of wanted to make a new card so we could play some of that up. And the new version of him really got to be, he's not just Tezzeret, he's like Tezzeret on Kaladesh doing really interesting things with Kaladesh. And so, while Agent of Bolas would have been fun to bring back, I really think we made a cool card that wasn't just Tezzeret, but was Tezzeret here and now.
So Ajani, as we saw in the storyline for Kaladesh, followed Tezzeret here and has been trying to kind of undermine his authority, trying to find out what he's up to in the service of Nicol Bolas. And so we see his card finally in Aether Revolt, and he's actually going to take the oath here. He's going to team up with the Gatewatch, and he's going to sympathize with their cause to the point that he's willing to join this organization.
Johnny, welcome to the Gatewatch. You have an oath. You're a Planeswalker. You can have a Planeswalker card. Both of them are going to be really powerful.
So Ajani and Yielding. Ajani is here on Kaladesh helping the Renegades overthrow the consulate. His +2 ability looks at 3 cards in your deck and helps you find more permanents to add to the fight. His -2 gets rid of a creature so that yours can get through. And his -9, if you get there, makes your army unstoppable.
When we think about, especially flavor text on the oath cards, because this represents our heroes. We want to capture the essence of what each hero is fighting for on their oath card. And in talking about Ajani, we did go around a number of times with each other, talking about what he is really fighting for, what he needs as a cat, as a Leonin, and what he believes other people he meets need. And that to him is a place that is safe, that they can call their own. And this also sort of echoes his relationship with Elspeth, who was searching for her home. And so it's really meaningful, and we got emotional when we came up with that one.
We don't just have 5 anymore. The Gatewatch goes to 6.